At this point, we will discuss about the social, cultural, and political change. The concept of identity is related to social change, cultural change, and political change. When our society changed, the certain concept of identity had also changed. Same with the cultural change. When certain practices eventually evolved, our identity also evolved. That is also true to our political system because when there are actually changes with the way we do our politics, certain identities had changed. In the year 1900s, it is actually very evident that there had what we call a political change. We all know that Filipinas are usually stay-at-home moms, or most of the time we are oriented that Filipinas should just stay at home. Filipinas should just cater to the needs of their husbands. And in fact, we're not even allowed to vote and participate in politics. It is only exclusive for the Filipino males. But later on, when Filipino women became more educated and were enlightened about their rights, particularly suffrage or the right to vote, again, the other term for the right to vote is suffrage. Again, the other term for the right to vote is suffrage. When Filipino learned about this certain right, they tried to fight for it and eventually they were able to be granted with a certain right. It was on the year 1930s that the campaign for women's suffrage gained ground. The road in gaining the suffrage or the right to vote was actually not easy for the Filipinas. Of course, they were allowed to vote given that they were able to meet certain conditions, especially when drafting on the 1935 Constitution. So, the framers of the 1935 Constitution allowed women to vote by virtue of the law that was passed by the National Assembly. Now, at that time, the law mandated of what we call a plebiscite on the question of Filipino women's suffrage, which required 300,000 votes to grant women the right to vote. So, women all over Philippines tried to convene, or the initiator of this certain Filipino movement actually tried to get votes all over Philippines just to reach about 300,000 votes. It was in the year 1937 that eventually the plebiscite yielded more than 400,000 votes in favor of women's suffrage. So basically, they exceeded about 100,000 votes from the required number of votes for that. The suffragist movement is said to be the precursor of current rights that Filipino women enjoy. Because if it didn't happen, eventually, perhaps the identities of Filipino women will still remain as someone or somebody that is mahinhin, somebody that is weak, somebody that is somehow always not equal to men. That certain move of Filipino women before just proved how a good example political and social changes transformed Filipino women's identities. Rapidly advancing technology also has profound implications for social, cultural, and political change. So, example of a result of an advanced technology is that the way we actually try to woo or pursue women. Okay, so before you really need to go to the house, okay, or men should really go to the house, should really do harana. But because of technology nowadays, harana is somehow being modified. Perhaps others would have this type of modification, which men would offer songs through videos or through recording music. So that can be like an example where there's what we call an advanced technology embedded. We're actually thankful with the emergence of internet because it paved way for people to connect quickly all over the world. So people know more about what is happening in the world. And also now, people across the world are becoming more similar in taste than they were 50 years ago. That's why, as you can see, there came a point wherein it became a trend that the sunflower design became popular. Almost everybody also are having the sunflower design shirts or blouses. And that is also true to the, like, say, for example, the emergence of K-pop. So, if in Luzon it became popular, it is somehow true to Visayas and Mindanao, especially when people are exposed to internet. Trends that transformed over time, we have clothing. Say, for example, women's clothing. So, we all know that before it is really required for you to wear the long skirts. Okay, in fact, you're not allowed to wear short shorts or the sleeveless ones. But nowadays, it will be weird if you will always wear a very long skirt. Okay, and then the next one is we have the hairstyle. For men, we all know that before we have what we call this like standard hairstyle, the Rizal hairstyle. But nowadays we have different styles. We have the Mohawk styles. So see, it eventually transformed. This is also true to fashion style because it transformed over time. But with fashion style, as you also notice, it is actually just like a cycle. Okay, so before there is already what we call like high waist skirts or high waist jeans, but in between those there were also the emergence of the jeans which are what we call the flare type, which is very open at the end part. But a few years later, the skinny jeans eventually became popular again, and same also with the high waist fashion styles. And for Filipinos were identified to be hardworking almost all over the world. In fact, 10% of Filipinos were actually abroad, so either as temporary migrants or permanent immigrants. So some of their aspects of their beliefs and values may have also changed. Now, yes, if your parent is an OFW, you may actually also observe that there are some practices of your parents or some, say, for example, diet of your parents had been influenced by the country which she worked or he worked. That is also true with this what we call perceived success, that for OFWs there is a high societal expectation that they really would bring pasalubong. Filipinos are actually known to that. Okay, we are identified that we're the type of people identified that when you go abroad, when you go back, you should have what we call pasalubong. But for other countries or other nationalities, actually don't have this certain practice, or they're not identified to be bringing pasalubong. Filipinos working abroad, they're regarded as the modern day heroes because, of course, they're also one of the contributor to our economy. Because every time they would send money to their families, there will somehow be like taxes. Okay, like say for example, when your parents also would like to send you a package, so it will actually undergo to Bureau of Customs, and then of course they're going to pay money for it. So yeah, that's actually one way for the government to earn money. There are the positive effects and negative effects of Filipino working abroad. The good thing of Filipinos working abroad is that there are Filipino restaurants and groceries abound. So because there are a lot of Filipinos, there is also what we call the Filipino community or Filipinos who create business and make restaurants or groceries, especially for countries that has lots of Filipinos. Now, also another one, Filipino nurses abroad are known for their kindness and care for patients, especially to the elderly. So, Filipinas or Filipino nurses were identified to be caring for their patients, and it's a good thing. The negative effects of Filipino working abroad, which I think a lot can relate, is that when you left your children at a very young age, and then when you come back, somehow your parents will have difficulty identifying you, or the bond you're going to have with your child is actually very different, of course, because you're actually physically far from him or from her. Now, also, you will primarily interact with each other through internet and other social media forms. So as what I mentioned, somehow the bond is actually different if your parent is really with you or working abroad. It's the negative effect.